We talked about a lot of weird stuff in the United States. Let me just do a little quick laundry list here. They also, here in the U.S., worked on airborne diseases like tuberculosis with no respiratory gear, shipped live anthrax that was accidentally marked as dead anthrax, mishandled SARS. So what was that again? The SARS was back when I was in college. It was
the
like
first SARS virus, yes.
Right. So that was like COVID before COVID, I guess.
It was.
They mishandled SARS samples and spread it. Somebody got infected and then just took a train home while sick because she wanted to get home for the holidays or whatever. Smallpox labs with no air filtration, not always using gloves, questioning the efficacy of gloves, which sounds like a tough argument to make, but whatever. That is just a sort of short, brief list of other things that have happened in the U.S. alone. And that really scares me because, like you said, they're building these labs all over the place. And I was on the fence about saying this, right? Because China is a major world power. They should be capable of running a level 4 lab. But now we see that the United States is also not really capable of flawlessly running a level 4 biosafety lab. And now we know China kept lying about the origins of COVID, saying it came from the United States or from Australia's frozen food. And I even had a Chinese ad agency or whatever media agency try to pay me and a lot of other YouTubers to post this video saying COVID came from a U.S. white-tailed deer or the U.S. white-tailed deer population. And the leaks are made so much worse by lying about them and covering them up. And I used to be like, China, right? But now it's like not just China. It seems like we're also, to be fair, doing the exact same thing. It's not, oh, here's my sample.
China!
It's not just China, right? The United States is doing the same thing. And that's really disheartening. I don't know how to, I can't really overstate it. I can't really, it's just really a crappy realization to come to.
There are a number of safety experts who have been pushing the United States to strengthen the kinds of oversights we have of our labs. And there's great pushback from those in the research community saying that if we enact even stricter regulations here, it will put us at a competitive disadvantage against other countries. But those who are advocating for it really note that the United States should be a leader in this. The United States was a leader in this back in the 1950s when Arnold Weedham set the standards that are to this day the bedrock of when people are using safety practices are what basically is still being used to this day.
When I first started looking at the whole China disinformation stuff, pointing to U.S. lab failures or just or frozen food or whatever for COVID, it was, of course, it was really disgusting. But now it sounds like it's pretty good disinformation because it's based in reality, right? It's not, oh, the U.S. doesn't have lab leaks, you're just trying to distract. It's the U.S. has tons of lab leaks and you're trying to distract. It seems like being more transparent would actually help in this case. And my friends C Milk and Winston covered this on their channel, The China Show. We'll link to it in the show notes because they also brought receipts and showed the email that we got asking us to repost this video. But will we ever find out where COVID originated, or did the delays by China and even like maybe the World Health Organization, did that just become impossible at this point?
One of the reasons I am hopeful that there is still an opportunity to find out where COVID-19 came from, whether that's from nature or from a lab, is a case I write about in the book of a really horrible anthrax outbreak that occurred in the former Soviet Union in 1979. And this is a case where dozens of people were killed after what was U.S. intelligence said was a Soviet bioweapons facility. It spewed anthrax spores into the air. It ended up, killing all these people and dogs and everything else. And the Soviets even came to the United States and said, this wasn't a factory and this is tainted meat. And it was actually, black market meat, and people ate this meat and that's how they got sick. And it was nothing about the air. And these scientists were even invited by U.S. scientists to Washington, D.C., to the national academies. And they showed slides and they showed pictures. And prominent U.S. scientists said, oh, we believe our colleagues from the Soviet Union. They seem to be very forthcoming and they're sharing information. And there's no evidence that this was, an aerosol release. They've made a convincing case that this all came from tainted meat. And then as the politics changed in the Soviet Union, you ended up having Russian President Boris Yeltsin in 1992 admit that in fact it was an anthrax accident at this lab, and times changed, and it turned out that scientists at great risk to themselves had saved evidence of what had actually occurred.
Wow.
They had kept the old organs of people. They had kept other records, and ultimately, Russian scientists around 1993 ended up publishing research that showed that this had in fact been this horrible biological lab accident, and it took 15 years for that truth to come out.
Well, and the government fell. So if the government doesn't fall from, like Xi Jinping is still around and his successors are still, if the CCP is still in charge of China, they're not going to be like, you know what, just tell everybody the truth. That's never going to happen, especially with the whole concept of saving face and everything. I mean, it's unlikely, even if a very friendly pro-Western government came to power, that they would go, oh, you know what, we should admit that we are the ones behind this. That's the last thing they're going to want to do. I got to wonder how they saved. I get saving research and things like that from the Soviet regime onto the new one. How do you save the organ of somebody who died? It's got to be weird to be like, no, I really just loved. I want a collection of lungs in jars on my desk. I'm going to keep these for a while. And everyone's like, okay, how do you do that?
They were pathologists, and they actually kept them in plain sight in
Wow.
jars out there, and so they were overlooked, and they just thought they were part of other kinds of collections and specimens that were used by these experts.
So
Hidden
weird.
in
Like, oh,
plain
that's
sight.
just creepy. Dr. Slovotnik, he loves he just has a lot of
Yes.
lungs in the office. Why is that weird? He's a scientist. That is admirable, but also very odd. That guy had a lot of explaining to do, that he's just waiting, he's just biding his time until he can come out with the truth. I guess it's to be admired, but it's a very weird picture to paint. This is a tangent here, but a few people online are talking about how the U.S. or the West, whatever it is, has bioweapons in labs in Ukraine, and that's supposedly one reason that Russia invaded. Now, that smacks of Kremlin bullshit to me. But do you know anything about those labs? Do they even exist?
I don't. That's not an area I've reported on. I do know, I mean, that the U.S. did fund when the Soviet Union fell. There was an effort by the United States to fund public health labs to try to dispose of and deal with the remnants of the former Soviet bioweapons program. But beyond that, I haven't reported on that.
Okay, I was just curious because with all the disinformation out there, it's hard to even to find any basis in reality for some of this stuff is almost impossible. And the other stuff is there's a lab there, but it studies the common cold, and it's not a bioweapon lab, but Putin says it is because he's got to justify sending in Spetsnaz troops to take it over or whatever. Some of the diseases that come out are really scary. There was one bacteria that can lurk in your body for decades before it suddenly decides to give you a super nasty disease and kill you. What is that?
Yeah, the one that's sometimes referred to as the Vietnamese time bomb. So that is called Burkholderia pseudomallii, and it is a bacteria that often is found in Southeast Asia, and it lurks in muddy, wet areas, and it can be absolutely deadly. And if you are infected by it, either like through inhaling aerosolized water, it can lurk in your body for decades before activating itself and ultimately killing you.
That's terrifying. That's terrifying. That's up there with those pools in Australia that have signs that say "Don't swim here" because there's brain-eating amoeba in the water. It's just you gotta. I don't know. Just never go swimming in anything that's not a chlorinated swimming pool. I guess it's just ugh. The fact that even exists is scary to me. That's
Yeah. Even scarier though is when you have a lab in Louisiana, which is an environment that can support that kind of bacteria using sloppy biosafety practices at the Chilean National Primate Research Center north of New Orleans. They ended up having an incident where this particular pathogen, a biosafety level 3 pathogen, ended up somehow infecting monkeys in their disease-free breeding colony outside of the labs and right next to a river and marshland and everything else. And it has led to concerns by officials that that bacteria may be growing and lurking in the environment in Louisiana as a result.
So that's really scary, right? Is this something that's in the soil then? Is that the one that's in the dirt?
It's the one that basically forms sort of like ant mounds down into the soil, and it can colonize the soil.
So someone's going to dig it up and build a structure, and the construction crew could theoretically get infected with this, and then we have a pandemic of whatever that is.
The way that people get ill in Australia and in Southeast Asia is often it's during typhoons. I mean, and so you have the issue of New Orleans and Louisiana and hurricanes. If it takes a significant enough foothold, if it has been deposited there by these monkeys that were outside, that's the concern, is that it could become more of a public health threat in the area.